and it's taking a little while. It's starting to setting it up. It's setting up for Facebook Live. There you go.
Hello, everyone. We're just preparing for our webinar that will start in a few minutes. I start speaking like this because I'm seeing that we are live in Facebook, right?
Yes, we are live on Facebook. Yes.
Wonderful. So here we are preparing, and in 5 minutes we will be starting the webinar. This is like the behinds, and we have Krishna Kumar, that of course is the speaker of today. He's the past president of IAC. Many of you know him already, a good friend and a good colleague. And Luis Gaviria, that I see him there as well, Fernando Gonzalez, an IAC member and volunteer, and Martha Pasternak. So we will be waiting while and giving time for people to join our Facebook Live. Now, this morning I've been having trouble with my microphone. Can you hear me?
Oh, very well, Pepe.
Because I'm not speaking with my headphones. I don't know why. So I have Luis Gaviria in the phone. Please take it from there, Fernando. This, before we start, speak something regarding the webinars.
Yes, this is live. We are here a couple of minutes before the launching of the live webinar with Krishna Kumar. And we're here with the team of IAC. Pepe Del Rio is on the line with Krishna Kumar and Luis Gaviria, Fernando Gonzalez, and Martha Pasternak. And this is the beginning of the Cool Vadis webinars of 2018. This morning, it was very interesting because, Pepe, we were with China.
Yes, we actually, it was a major breakthrough for the IAC because it was the first time that we had a Quo Vadis coaching webinar in Chinese, but also it was the first time that we had an IAC webinar in Facebook Live. So as we're going to be doing for our Chinese webinars, all people from main China are going to be allowed, like they were, to join through Zoom because they struggle to be able to get in Facebook. So we had people coming in through Zoom, and of course we had people watching the webinar in Facebook Live. So I was delighted also because as part of the webinar, we had a live coaching session with Isabella Wang and Lian Chan. So it was in Chinese. So it was fantastic to be able to listen to it. And the topic of the conversation, of the coaching conversation, was how to construct a coaching culture in organizations. So I was delighted. I don't know, you guys listening to this, and as I was saying, this is a major breakthrough.
Yes, and what's amazing, Pepe, is that the way that technology has really taken coaching and the IAC and the 9 masteries to places where, 10 years ago, we would never imagine. And what was fascinating for me, even though I don't speak the Mandarin, was just listening to a conversation in another, in Mandarin, and looking towards what coaching is really doing in terms of transformation worldwide and reaching places where what was interesting is they do not have access to Facebook in mainland China, but through this technology and through the Zoom, they could come in and participate. Then that was, that was beautiful.
That was amazing. And another thing that thanks to have this in Facebook Live, you will be able to listen to all our webinars, and we will, of course, leave our webinars in our Facebook Live fan page, the IAC Facebook Live fan page. And in a month or so, we will have all the webinars available through our YouTube channel. And not only that, we are going to have also all the webinars from our Sri Lanka convention last year through our YouTube channel. That probably will happen at the beginning of next year. So right now it's 8 o'clock. And if you all agree, Krishna, Fernando's, because we have Fernando Celis and Fernando Gonzalez, Luis Gaviria, that I see him also there, and Martha Pasternak, we can start right now officially our transmission for all our English-speaking viewers. This is actually the second webinar this day. As we were saying before, we started the day with a webinar in Chinese, Lian Chang, and we also had the opportunity to see a live webinar, a live coaching session with Lian Chang and Isabel Wang. So it was fantastic to be able to listen. And now, just getting started with our English webinars, with our Vadis English webinars. This is the second year in a row that we are having these Vadis webinars. The first year, I believe we had them around February or last year. And next year, we will, please mark your calendar, the last week of November, we will be having, it will be Vadis webinars week. So, and we will prepare to have all the best speakers and all the best webinars, so you are able to listen to them live. And then to all our IAC members, please also listen. You will be able to listen to them in our YouTube channel. So before we start, help us invite your friends to come to this webinar. We are going to be listening to Krishna Kumar, that of course he is the past president of the IAC, and it was named, and I named him this year presidential ambassador for the IAC, and he's going to be speaking about a topic that I really like, and it's going to be a wonderful webinar, the one we're having ahead. We're going to be speaking about awareness, how awareness illuminates the path to coaching mastery. And while we are waiting to have more people in Facebook Live and joining Facebook Live, I also want to remind everyone, please like our IAC Facebook Live page and mark so you can be advised when the webinars and when our live presentations are. So right now, Fernando, I don't know if you are if you are following right now through Facebook Live.
Yes, yeah, I'm following it right through with the Facebook Live.
And if you want to say hi to some of the people that are there, I will very much appreciate it.
Sure. Just a second. Yes. Let me see. Let me check this out. Yeah. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. And this is Fernando Celis. And today we began the cycle of the Cool Vadis webinars. This morning we were in China, and now we go on further on the planet to listen to Krishna Kumar. Krishna Kumar was the past president of the IAC, and he will take it on from here. Krishna, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well, Fernando. Thank you so much for having me and hosting this call today. And thank you, Pepe. Let me begin by saying how grateful I am to be here today with all coaches from around the world. And a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And as Fernando, you said, a good day to make it simple enough. I'm also personally very, grateful that we've been able to take Vadis that we began as an initiative a couple of years ago to the Chinese world and the Spanish world. So it's really amazing the growth that the IAC has done in recent years. And as always, I feel deeply humbled and privileged to be here speaking with all the coaches across the world. Without delaying further, let me begin today's presentation and share with you what little knowledge I have gained as a coach in my 2 decades of coaching experience. Today's topic, as my friend Pepe said, is and colleague.
Krishna, sorry to interrupt you. Fernando, you need to highlight Krishna because we are seeing your image in Facebook Live right now. Sorry to interrupt, Krishna.
Oh, no.
These are the small things that happen in a live webinar.
Not a problem at all. Tell me when I'm ready to go and I will continue.
Yes. Let me see. There you go, my friend. You're ready. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So today's conversation that I wish to have with all of you is on the topic of mastering awareness. And I have been, this is actually an intriguing combination of words, mastery and awareness, because I have been personally a great advocate of awareness in coaching from the time I began my coaching journey many years ago. And in recent years, in 2016, I was able to actually develop a model called, the model is called Aware, and I'll speak a little bit about that. But today's conversation is specific to this topic, which is how can awareness illuminate the path that we take to coaching mastery? And the IAC, for instance, is, as an organization, we have always emphasized the path to coaching mastery. So today I want to combine the two and speak about it a little bit more, and also share with you my journey as to the importance of awareness in this world of coaching. So let me begin with that and start with a little poll, which I would like to ask you to do. I mean, we really do not need you to answer or not. All I want you to do is think about these questions. And if you feel like answering in the chat boxes or on Facebook, you're very welcome to do that. But it's really more to provoke thought. Today's webinar that I will be, sharing my thoughts with you is focused on something quite different from those I have done in the years gone by. The emphasis today is on you, the coach. It's on how you, as a coach, can improve your level of awareness in a coaching session. Because we all know that coaching is not really something that's a formula. It's not really a process or a model or learning a bunch of skills and competencies and then applying it. There is a huge basis in science that we apply in coaching, but more than anything else, at the highest levels, coaching, I believe, will take on an art form. It's not a way of doing something, it's more an immersive being experience. And so I have some 3 questions to ask you, which I'm sure many of you would have grappled with, including myself. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sharing that with you. Let me begin with one very simple thing. Someone has a conversation with you, one of your coaching clients, and somewhere along the way, I wonder if you've ever had trouble recalling the names of people or places or situations that your client mentioned just a few moments ago. And you can, think about it and answer yes or no. Similarly, another one. While your client is speaking, have you often found or occasionally found your attention drifting while you're listening to him or her? And the third question I had is, sometimes have you ever felt your conversation getting stuck and you somehow feel in your mind that there is no progress? And these questions, I'm sure it doesn't happen all the time, but if it has happened even once, any one of these three things, and I'm just listing only three for the sake of time here and not to clutter up our thought processes. If you have ever in your coaching sessions, and I'm sure I'm speaking to a lot of senior coaches here, master coaches, or even people who are on the journey of learning coaching, in your coaching practice, have you ever encountered any of these problems? And if you have, just type it in, yes or no. Even a one yes will do. I'm not going to stop for that. You're going to leave it to you, and I'm sure my colleagues who are monitoring your messages may let me know as we go along if there have been yeses or nos. But I would only say this: I would personally say yes to all three, and I think many of you would probably say yes. And if you haven't said yes to even one of them, I would salute you. But I would also caution you and wonder whether, perhaps it's time you also reflected a little more, because the chances are that it would have happened and you may not recollect it. So I'm leaving you with that thought and moving forward. Yeah. As I move forward, let me again ask you a simple question: that if these are the problems that come up, what's it that we need to do? How does it impact us? As I started by saying, a couple of years ago in 2016, I publicized this model of coaching, and I don't like to call it a model. I mean, models are very limiting. I would like to just say a kind of concept that I wanted to share with you. There are no mechanics here. There's only certain thoughts that I'll share, and a certain, philosophy and concepts that you can pick up and apply in your own practice. And this was inspired by this wonderful, I would say, quotation that I read by the famous Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, when he said, "Awareness is like the sun, and when it shines on things, they're transformed." And basing my entire coaching practice and my learnings, I developed this model called Aware, focusing on one thought, and that was that if I want to be a great coach, if I want to be a masterful coach, for me, then the key lies in being self-aware as myself, as a coach. And of course, making my client, or maybe in team coaching, a group of clients, all of them self-aware. But self-awareness for me was really the number one key. And why did I come to that thought? Again, I went back to great masters, not only in the world of coaching, but across generations, across millennia. And wherever we went, we saw this thought had permeated to some of the greats in the world, and their wisdom is what I want to share, just a few of them. Abraham Maslow, but I think everybody knows who he is. I mean, we are all familiar with Abraham Maslow's, the what he had shared with us about the levels of needs and so on. But what is important here is, in this context, what he said. He said, what is necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself. Even further back, let's go a long way back, many millennia back. And one of the seven sages of Greece, Thales of Miletus, said, the most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. So if it's important that we change ourselves and through awareness, then he said it's going to be really difficult. Let's find some others. Billie Jean King, the famous tennis star, the legendary tennis player, said self-awareness is probably the most important thing towards being a champion, and champions produce top-notch results all the time. So now we understand that self-awareness is really important, that is really difficult. So what's it that makes it so difficult? The famous Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, whom I had the privilege of knowing as a little boy, said, to understand the whole operations of one's own mind requires a great deal of insight, a great deal of inquiry without condemnation, which means you got to start looking into yourself non-judgmentally. And that, trust me, and I'm sure many of you would agree, is not an easy task. So we now understand that just it's not something that I or you think about, but many great people, philosophers and sports people and psychologists in the past, all of them have come up with the same thoughts, that wisdom has percolated through the ages. And how can you and I apply that in our world of coaching? What is it that we need to do? To help us on that path, I put together this little concept or this little philosophy called aware, which I thought we could apply in coaching. And the model was as simple as this. I broke it up into 5 parts because I kind of liked playing with those words, but then it also made a lot of sense. The first A was for awaken. The second was for willpower. The third was for action. Then came reflection and finally engagement. And it wasn't any linear model here. Each of them operate in isolation. Those of you who want to listen in on, if someone wants to listen to my expanding on the aware model, I can always share that. It's available on YouTube, and I can share the link with some of you if you like at some later stage. But today, what I want to expand on is how you and I can apply this in our coaching practice. How can this model and the concept of awareness lead us to becoming coaching masters, or at least put us on the path to coaching mastery? And I would emphasize that this is not linear. Each one of these, I would say, components can come into play at any given time. And what I would do is, and as I move this presentation forward, at various occasions, you will see these little buttons popping up there on the side and telling you which one I felt it applied to most. And towards the end of this presentation that I'm making today in this webinar, I would also try to connect it in a very brief way with the IAC Masters. And I'm doing that in a very, very small way, simply because I think many of you on this call would like to do that on your own yourself, in as deep a way as you possibly can, while you go on your own path to mastery. Let me begin and move this forward a little more and understand awareness at more than one level. Where do we find awareness? Awareness, as we just spoke, is a lot to do with ourselves. The inner awareness, the self-awareness. But there are other dimensions. There are other levels of awareness that we can find. And one of them is the social awareness. The awareness of us with somebody else. Now, this is what happens in coaching. Coaching, of course, there is a concept called self-coaching yourself, and I think that's really, really difficult, but it's very powerful. But more often than not, those of us who make a living out of coaching would be coaching someone else. And when you are interacting with another person, we have been told so many times, it's all about the client. And to a large extent, try to keep you out of the picture. Try to be as invisible as you can. And believe me, that's not easy. You know it and I know it. In fact, I don't think it's really necessary. When I had conversations many years ago with a legendary coach called John Whitmore, and I again had the privilege of spending time with John quite a few hours. One of the things John said, and this was really important, and he said, it is not possible that you and I, when I'm coaching you or you're coaching me or somebody else, that we can get into the shadows. In fact, we shouldn't get into the shadows, because as a coach, you have a presence. You are an individual, and in many ways, a strong, powerful individual in your own right. And the coachee or the client is with you, and he wants to draw upon your presence too, in a nice, positive way. So you do have a presence. The question is, how can I make that presence, as I said, the most positive presence, the real coaching presence, and not just any presence of being physically somewhere nearby? And that's another element I will speak about. And finally, the third level of awareness is that of the environment and the systems around us. We function within that third level of environment. In fact, I'm often, I give the analogy because as some of you who know me or have heard me before may know that among my other professions, I'm also a sports coach. I've been a tennis coach for a good long time, almost 25 years. And in my career as a tennis coach, I sometimes wonder as to how these awareness levels apply. And let's just imagine for a minute, cast your mind back into someone, say a Roger Federer or, like him, Djokovic, Nadal, all these top great players of the present. And imagine for a minute that this wonderful, great, talented human being, this champion, has stepped onto an arena and may be playing the final match. How do these levels of awareness impact that particular person? What is it they need to do? As he or she steps onto the court, they must be acutely aware about themselves. Their inner awareness must be so strong. They must also be very aware of their opponent, the person they are interacting with, and in this case, competing with. They must understand that other person as well as they possibly can. And equally, they must be aware of what's happening around them. There probably will be lights. There may be, temperature conditions might change. It may be a hot day, a cold day. It may be quite breezy out there. The wind, the wind force may be high. There may be advertising hoardings around the sides which may distract them. The crowds may be lots. And this doesn't have to be the tennis arena alone. It could be, soccer, or it could be anything else. And what we need to do that as a coach, when I am in a coaching conversation, it's no different. I am with somebody else. And when I am with that person, I also have the system around me that I must be very aware about. So these are the three levels of awareness. But moving forward, let me just pick on the first one. And I'm going to take a little pause here and request you that if you have any thoughts or any questions or clarifications that you need to make, do type it into Facebook or into the chat box here or wherever you like to. And maybe in a little while, a half an hour from now, I will try and take as many questions as I can, with the caveat that I don't know everything. In fact, I probably know much less than you, but I will try my best to share my thoughts with you and clarify what concepts I would like to put on the table today. One of the things that I work on with most of my clients is this concept called intentionality. And this is fundamentally one of the biggest problems that we would face in coaching. Not necessarily with every coachee, but with quite a few coaches. The fact that as you start on a path of performance and it goes over time, this famous sigmoid curve comes into play, and at occasional stages in your coaching performance, you would hit a peak and then you would actually drop. At the beginning of any person's journey in a new profession, in a new sport, in any arena of engagement that you would be tempted to start, at the very beginning, all of us are learners. In fact, some of us remain lifelong learners, but in the beginning, you are a pure learner because you don't know anything much. And the journey continues. And as we progress on that journey, the journey of apprenticeship, the journey of being a student in the early stages, at some point in time, you hit what we call a plateau. And when you hit a plateau, you find your progress isn't, moving as much as you would like it to. And that's a dangerous place to be, because that's when our purpose gets diluted. That's the time at which people switch careers. People decide that that particular activity is not really is something they want to do. But those who stay there, and you as a coach, if you remain strong with your purpose, if you get fixed on your intentionality, you are then in a position to continue till such time as you hit another plateau and perhaps another dilution. But the more you climb, what you then have an opportunity to do is learn more and equally learn differently. Between the first and second plateau, and I'm being very schematic here, it's not necessarily one or two, it could be many plateaus, you would come across a situation where you would also start applying what you have learned. And you might apply this very creatively. It wouldn't be a straightforward sharing of what you learned. It would be maybe you do a little adaptations of your learnings depending on circumstances and situations. And that creative adaptive phase is what's normally the second thing that arrives on the path to mastery, till such time as you hit another climb and maybe continue that path to being a coaching master. But the key is that we frequently hit these plateaus. In any activity, every human being will hit a plateau. Whether you're the greatest of champions or the greatest of performers, you will hit that plateau. And when you hit that plateau, it is very important as a coach for yourself and the people you coach to see that the dilution of purpose doesn't take place. And we will also expand and figure out what really causes this dilution. What happens to make us dilute our feeling of purpose? What is intentionality? I decide to take something because I'm passionate about it. I want to stay with it. I like it. But at some point in time, my purpose, which is, the intention that I began with, if it dilutes, I need to find a way to overcome that. Intentionality is frequently visualizing that intention and converting it into intentionality. As I keep on reinforcing my desire, reinforce my passion, over time, my basic original intention then becomes a long-term intentionality. I keep visualizing the path I want to go on. But then again, the derailer there is, how can I not make sure that my purpose is not diluted? What's it that happens to stop it? At that point in time, to stay with our purpose, we have a problem which I'd like to share here, which is called distraction. Distraction is really the number one enemy of awareness, and within awareness of intentionality. We as human beings, our minds are cluttered with desires and wants and feelings that pop up when we least want them to. The question is this who I really am? What is it I really want? How do I feel? When these thoughts keep coming into our minds, that's the distraction. It derails our purpose. For instance, some of the distractions that you may commonly come across, typical distractions are, I didn't do very well last time. I'm sure I'm not going to do well again. When you recollect a past failure. Or everybody else is doing well, I'm lousy. I'm not good enough to be doing this activity. Particularly if you're in sports and somebody starts beating you all the time, whom you used to beat earlier, perhaps, then you no longer want to play the game. And you start questioning your own abilities, which can lead to rumination. Rumination is a very dangerous thing because it happens when you sit at home and you brood on what's going on and on. In fact, much of what the past failures, the comparisons, the self-criticism, all of that, in fact, is a package called rumination. And once rumination starts, you no longer focus attention on what matters, and your mind gets distracted on possibly irrelevant things. The consequences of distraction, if these are distractions, what are their consequences? What is the result that takes place inside our minds? One of them is fear of failure. We start trying too hard when we don't do well. We get angry and frustrated. We may start thinking the whole thing is boring, or we just clutter our mind up with numerous things. As I said earlier, distract ourselves with irrelevant things because something else seems more exciting for that moment. When these distractions come in, fears and anxieties and angers and boredom and over trying yourself, the mind gets busy. Very often, they also lead us to feel very vulnerable. They lead us to question our original values and beliefs in who we are. And that is, again, one of the single biggest enemies of being self-aware. The question is, how does this happen? Where does this take place in the human mind? It's very well to say, I'm getting distracted, I wish I was on a path, but how does it all happen inside ourselves? What goes on during a typical day? I mean, let's just take an example of a little baby that's just been born. And the baby comes into this big bad world of ours, and from a state of oblivion, all of a sudden there's confusion, not too different from how you and I wake up from deep sleep, particularly if you're waking up in a strange room and you do not really get your coordinates and your bearings. What is it that the thought then happens next? For the baby, over the next, I would say, 6 to 18 months, the baby moves on a voyage of discovery, learns to differentiate herself or himself from the world outside. And one of the interesting experiments was when they put a little mirror in front of this baby. Initially, the baby thought it was another toy. Probably felt that there was a baby hidden in the mirror. On occasion, tried to go behind it to make friends, which we know in our YouTube, it looks really cute. But then the reality was at some point in time, the baby figured out that the image in the mirror was really its own image. I mean, we see this often in birds and so on, banging themselves against window glasses. And that's really the stage at which the baby was, till the baby discovered in its process of exploring the situation that, yes, what I see in the mirror is me. And then it does a further round of exploration and figures out that this is my hand and my nose and the rest of me. At this point in time, experiments were conducted by scientists where they put maybe, posted stickers on the baby's forehead to see if the baby figured out that it wasn't the baby's, part of the baby. They did that with animals and mammals. They did it with elephants and orangutans and dolphins. And interestingly, among all of those other creatures and species in the world, the ones that came closest to us in figuring out that there was something new and different in ourselves when they looked in the mirror, and this may not surprise some of you, but it may surprise others, were the dolphins. And they were discovered to be the smartest of all in terms of identifying who they were. Who am I? And so you've reached that stage of identification of who you are, and you now know when you look in the mirror, that's me, that's my nose, that's my body, that's who I am. And then you move into another level, which is that we call permanence. And permanence is the question that is asked about who am I, not today, but how am I looking compared to what I looked some time ago. So here your identity is linked to time. That's a fascinating thing. And this level is only available in our human species. This is the time we start differentiating ourselves from everyone else. We are able to link what we look like and who we are in the context of time. And you move to the highest level, which is that of meta self-awareness or self-consciousness, where you stop, figuring out who you are because you moved beyond that, but you go and start looking at how you look to somebody else. Who am I and how am I perceived by some other person? Typically, we would notice this in human beings in teenage years, where we are very self-conscious about how we look, how we present ourselves, and so on. The question is, this is kind of like the evolution of the human being through, their growing years. But how does that affect you and me as coaches? How does it affect our own levels of distraction in a given day? And how can we use this when we coach somebody else? What really happens here is, as I'm going through a normal day, there are times when I'm in deep sleep, oblivion, and there are times when I'm at acutely self-aware. But in between, I go through all these levels, like this wave. And there are times when between oblivion and being at the highest level of awareness, I do go through all the levels of distraction. We have read about great yogis who have spent a lifetime of practice being able to move from oblivion to instant self-awareness. They skip all the levels, but neither you and I can probably claim to being that. So we need to be aware that during the day, we move through all these distractions, we explore, we question identity, we discover, we link ourselves with time. We do all this in the course of a given day. The next step to look at is as we worked a lot about ourselves, our social awareness follows our self-awareness. As I said, how am I perceived by somebody else? Today, I'm sitting in a coaching conversation with another person. I asked many of you the question as to, did you face some of these issues when you coached? I have another set of questions that I would like to ask. Now, in the context of somebody else. In your coaching session, the first question I'd asked was, did you feel your conversation was stuck and not progressing the first time? Now I'm going to add to that. Go a little deeper. Ask yourself if you were fully understanding what your client's challenges were. You tried. We all do that. But in hindsight, did you ever come across situations where you felt, oh, I didn't quite get that? Or wondered what could be your next step to support the client, step or steps? What more should I do? And here I'm not talking about an advisory situation. I'm talking about a complete normal coaching conversation where you're there to improve the client's well-being, take the client, move the client in the desired direction, and all the rest of it. Again, this is a kind of poll. All I need you to do is perhaps say yes or no. And if it's a yes, mention it there. And again, I would say that based on my extensive conversations with numerous coaching colleagues across the world, it would be a rare person who said no to all of this. More often than not, all of us as coaches have faced some challenges of this nature. And what I want to do is, again, probably use awareness as a concept to try and overcome these situations as and when we encounter them. What could that be? Earlier, we spoke about distractions, and I want to add a couple of words to that. I want to bring in this concept of conditioned thinking. The conditioned thinking box is what we are made up of inside our heads. Over a period of time, as we move along a path of trying to perform, trying to be better at something, we run into all these situations of distractions that I mentioned. And in the conditioned thinking boxes, over time, we encounter a number of fears. We may come across a situation where we couldn't really, move the client the way the client wanted to go. Perhaps we reached a situation where we didn't quite, feel that we supported the client as much as we would have liked to. Perhaps, during the coaching process, our own biases intervened in the coaching process. Our beliefs came and blocked the path. And so you have fears and limiting beliefs and biases that make up this box that I call the conditioned thinking box. And in many ways, that leads to a state that we would like to call conformity. The conformity state is a state where you tend to fall back on what you've done well in the past, even though it may not really be the way to go into the future. You keep yourself busy doing just that, because being busy is a one way to feel good about what you're doing. It's not necessarily the way to do good, but it's a way to feel good about what you're doing. But we must realize that it's not moving you away from a zone. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating here, but in a way, it's nice to emphasize that it's a zone where you feel uncomfortable. Perhaps not really panic, but in a way, it's a zone that you don't like to move out of, because what's on the other side could be very uncomfortable. People call it the comfort zone and so on, but I prefer to call it a conformity zone, because a comfort zone is a misnomer. I mean, we can be really uncomfortable in comfort zones, as we all know. I mean, I could be in a traffic jam in a city I know well and be uncomfortable, but still not afraid. But this is when you move in to an area, to the unknown, and fear for what's going to happen. How does one move beyond conformity? And the way to move beyond conformity, as you can see on the screen, is this concept called mobility. And mobility requires us, and this is a thought I'm leaving with all of you, requires us to use these concepts called active empathy and transposing. In that way, you get out of the conditioned thinking box. You will notice on occasion that I have these buttons that I've put up there, which talk about willpower, action, reflection, linking back to the aware model, which you're seeing on the left of your screen. But on the right, you will see these buttons. And that's my way to link it back to the model that I spoke about, where you act and you reflect. And this is, this will be well demonstrated in these questions. When you are in a situation where you feel that perhaps I didn't understand the challenge, that some boxes have blocked my communication, perhaps my feelings about my client are a little conflicted, and I still want to show progress. These reflections, if you look into these reflections carefully in a dispassionate, detached manner, you can then come across certain ways to act. And the action, not in any order, one of the things we need to do to feel supportive is to stop resisting our own boxes. It's very easy to, unless we are really good at detaching, to resist certain thoughts that come in our mind. It's very difficult to resist it. Otherwise, what we would do is that we would stop moving forward. And we keep the intentionality always in our mind. We stay with our purpose. And the most important thing is, even if I feel something for my client, which is empathy, and that's really good, empathy in the coaching context is a limited concept. It's a limited feeling. For coaches, empathy is needed, but what is really needed is active empathy, or in other words, transposing yourself into the other person's thought process. Make an attempt to do that, and then take that next step and actually go and step forward and say, how can I help you? How can I help? Now, more often than not, we stop short of it. I'm sure many of us use those words and say, how can I help you? But do we really take that extra step and feel for that person in a helping way, genuinely helping way? And if you do, and like I said, I don't pass judgment on the fact that do we or do we don't. I'm sure many of you do that. It's only a way of emphasizing the importance of it. So the mobility zone from the conformity zone is actually a zone where we move ourselves. And here I go back to us being coaches, though it applies to our client and coachee too. We move beyond that so-called panic zone into a zone of learning. It's a zone where we get more adaptive, we get more creative, we try out new things, we don't have those fears. We can challenge ourselves in a positive way, because if we do that, then we are not afraid of the future, we actually embrace it. So these are the keys to being mobile. Mobile in our mind, being ready to move forward or to move our client forward. The final level of awareness, and again, I would emphasize that please feel free to write down your thoughts and your notes and any ideas that you have, and I will definitely do my best to answer as many as I possibly could at the end of the webinar. And the third and final phase of my presentation today is to work on the concept called the outer awareness. And what does that mean for us? I rewind back to the path to mastery that we spoke about. And I will talk about one thing, that imagine you are on that path of mastery and you reach what you believe to be your peak. And because you know at that peak, then you can't go any higher at that point in time. Doing all that you're presently doing, it's only going to fall and probably plateau. Just imagine for a minute you know where that is, though that's not possible for many of us. Because when you're climbing high, you think you can keep climbing. But it doesn't really happen like that. But if you were at that entropy point, as I called it, it's a very dicey place to be. It's a dangerous place, because then it's only a slide downhill. How could I avoid that? And for that, the good coach, when you're self-coaching yourself or you're coaching somebody, along that path, you take frequent stops to reflect. And the reflection points that come in, again, you'll see the buttons of action and reflection that I have shared on the right of the screen, is a very powerful thing, because it's due to reflection that you are then able to start a new curve. You are then able, if you are fortunate enough to catch the reflection point as you climb up, to be able to create your new curve get back on the learning curve, and probably do what you need to do to avoid falling into the trap of entropy. And how could one do that? What actually happens at this reflection point, entropy point, that allows us to, jump forward? What's it that we need to do? This sounds conceptually okay, but there's something that we need to really do. And that, the way we can redefine that is the word redefine. Sounds very funny when I said that, but it's actually true, because what you really need to do is redefine your purpose. When you hit the reflection stage, redefine what you're doing and help yourself to find a new path. And that's the path that I'm going to introduce now in the time that I have left, which is called the path of being engaged, fully engaged in what you're doing. When you're engaged in what you're doing, we need to redefine, and we've broken it into three parts: performance, learning, enjoyment. In the typical context of climbing up the path to performance or the path to mastery, we overemphasize doing well at the cost of learning and enjoyment. So this triangle, which should be actually this equilateral, which should have the same dimensions on all three sides, tends to be skewed in favor of performance, a little more on learning, and probably very low on enjoyment. And that is something we need to redefine. And the redefinition to do that is a concept called the state of flow. Because as the interesting thing is that coaching is a profession, it's a practice, it is a way of being, not just a way of doing. Because if we were just doing something, it would be performance. It's beyond that. And to be able to get into the best state of being, we need to get into what is called a state of flow. And what is a state of flow? Those of you who have some familiarity with it, and I certainly do, because I have been very privileged, honored to be associated with the person who first discovered this, and that is Professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He is one of the great psychologists around now, and lives in the United States, but originally from Budapest in Hungary. And we call him Mike. So Mike actually came up with this concept many years ago. And he said flow is that optimal state of consciousness when you are engaged in an activity, full of energy, deeply involved, enjoying yourself, and you deliver peak performance at the same time feeling at your best. Isn't that amazing? And the good news is it's a transformation available to anyone, anywhere, provided that certain initial conditions are met. So what are these conditions? The conditions are, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but I'll just, scan the whole thing a little bit. The conditions are, you need to have clear goals every step of the way, intentionality. And smaller goals are good. There's no point saying that I want to be the world champ. I mean, it's better to start by saying I'd like to be the neighborhood champ in whatever I'm doing. Distractions, the biggest enemy. And you get feedback to what you're doing immediately. You don't have fears. You don't feel self-conscious. There's a disappearance of the ego, which leads to whatever you do being merged with the highest level of awareness. But to get to that, there's a very interesting thought that comes in, which is that whatever you're doing must match your ability or your skill at that point in time. And to be able to do that and make that happen, you need to be an autotelic personality, or your activity becomes autotelic, which means you set the goal. The goal is set by you, the self goal. And if you do that and you do it well, your activity, whatever it may be, will bring you its own reward. You're not looking to somebody else for the reward. It's what you set the goal for yourself. And that's as simple as it comes. But the point is, it's not as simple as that, because it's so complicated. It's a complex and dynamic process, because to match challenge and skills to get into flow, if you were to end up with waking up too much of a challenge, you could be anxious, worried, or on the other hand, if it's too easy, you could be bored and relaxed. If it's not too tough, you could be just aroused or excited, or you could be in control. But the perfect state is when challenging skills match, but equally it's complicated and dynamic to get into that exact state. And that process by which we get into that state, I'm going to share it with you. The path to mastery, I'm going to share it with you in a little schematic way. On one side, you have the anxious and worried zone. On the other side, you happen to have the boredom and relaxed zone. And if it's too easy, what we normally do, human beings, is we up the challenge. We increase it, we tweak it to make it tougher. And when it gets tougher, what happens is somewhere we get into flow and we don't quite know it, of course. But we keep adding challenge because we don't know it. And then suddenly we find it's too hard. And then we make it easy again. Somewhere along the way, we get into flow once more. And then we find that, maybe we need to increase the challenge once more. And so on. So we get onto this steep learning curve and do our skill building, knowing that occasionally we have got into flow, but not knowing exactly when. And that's in fact in many ways the paradox of the whole thing, that when you have peak awareness, you don't really know. And if you know, you stop knowing. Because once that happens and I say, hey, I am in flow now, or I am fully engaged, or I have been fully aware, that in itself, the fact that you want to remain there will bring you into distraction. You'll try too hard and you will break the flow. As I conclude, I just want to take this opportunity because these masteries are very close to my heart. As you heard in the introduction, I have been part of the IAC for many years now. And my colleague Pepe mentioned, I am presently the presidential ambassador. I was the IAC president for a couple of years in 2016 and 17. We did a lot of work in building up the organization. And for us, the core of the IAC rests on these 9 IAC coaching masteries, which were developed by a brilliant, amazing group of 30 plus master coaches from around the world, under the stewardship of some of my former very highly qualified and esteemed colleagues. The IAC masteries came into being. Many of you on the call are already IAC members, probably on the path to mastery. So I don't want to take too much time here. What I have done is try to share with you the concept of aware, which I thought is closely linked to the path to mastery that you can achieve by traveling using the IAC 9 masteries. For instance, if we were to take the simple thing of intentionality or willpower, mastery number 7 listed there, setting intentions. If you want to talk in terms about inviting possibility, we could look at awakening, processing in the present, awakening, expanding potential could come about through willpower and intentionality, engaged listening, expressing, clarifying through action and reflection, and of course, engagement and flow across all 9 of them. I've now come to the end of my presentation. I know I have been a little, I've moved a little fast. I'm sorry about that because, we have a limited time to share with you. The idea was to put on the table for your thought, for your study, some amount of research that I did. I would also like to mention that the model that I have shared with you, the experiences that I'm, again, putting on the table here, are based on my own studies and the interactions I've had with many master coaches across the world, particularly some of the great coaching legends like John Whitmore, Tim Galway, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, John O'Neill, and so many others. I mean, there are too many to mention out here, but just to say I acknowledge a debt of gratitude to all of them for getting me to where I am. And with that, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to ask you for any questions that you may have while all of us continue to move on this path of mastery. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I've heard this presentation many times, and I'm always, I always get something out of it. I've even translated this presentation to Spanish once or twice, and it's always a great thrill to be able to hear you. So we have some comments, and maybe you can take some of the For example, Billy Crutcher says, thank you for this great teaching this morning. I wish you all well from North Carolina. Erika Friesi, thank you. This is a very interesting and a big collaboration. Here we go. To see you, do we have to pay some kind of subscription? No, you can see these webinars through the way you're seeing them through Facebook Live, Maria Virginia, but we invite you to join the IAC. We are a world of a family worldwide of coaches, very much focused in the excellence in coaching, in the way of getting to masterful coaching. And as Krishna was speaking, through the IAC masteries. One great model, I don't know who this person is, but it says, great model, wonderful to learn about the different stages through which we need to go in order to get to know ourselves. And here's a question, Krishna. Well, it's actually, they are asking if you could expand a little bit more in how to work with clients that are trapped in a conditioned thinking.
So that is really the topic for a full presentation. You know, it's such an exciting question that I could do that whole day. The simple thing is to mention that the concept that I spoke about called active empathy, the concept of transposing, which means that if the client, and all clients, trust me, I think it will be very difficult for anybody who's been in the world of coaching long enough not to be coming across such a situation as in this question. Most of our clients are, as someone said, trapped in this conditioned thinking. Before we move into the client, we must first ask ourselves, how trapped are we in that particular box? Because we carry our own boxes too of conditioned thinking. And very often our boxes block seeing the other person's boxes. So it works two ways. One, try and understand ourselves more. And at the same time, try and transpose ourselves into the mind of our client. And that way the answers will come much better and help them to get out of their own box. That's the only way I can put it in a short answer, because there is no one formula for this, much as I would like to give it.
Okay. And another question is how to maintain, let me see, how to maintain and sustain. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Pepe. Go right
now, another question is how to maintain and sustain the flow state.
Wow. If I knew the answer to that, I would be in the flow state all the time. I mean, yes, the key to it is to look at those conditions of flow that I listed out there. One of the ways to do that, the simplest way to do that, is to make sure that you set your own goals and balance your goals with your ability at that point in time. Do not take something on that is too tough or too easy, and be open to receiving continuous feedback. And that would be one of the first ways to get into flow. I mean, we wouldn't know we were in flow till we look back on it later, in looking backwards into the event that took place, and then you would get into flow. In fact, as an aside, if somebody is interested, they can reach out to me, and there are certain simulation games that people can play to practice how to get themselves and others into flow. It's a behavioral simulation game that I can share details of if someone reaches out to me later on.
Okay. Another question, Krishna. From your point of view, what are the best practices to manage anxiety, and how can you support someone who is in the panic zone?
I'm getting really good questions today, Pepe. I mean, how do we support someone? Well, I think the simplest thing for anybody who gets into anxiety or panic zone is to firstly Ask them to step back from the situation, detach themselves from that situation. And really, I'm speaking now about not some deep psychological trauma. We are talking about simple panic. I mean, let me give you an example which might relate to people. As a sports coach, I coach a lot of youngsters, and many of them take part in tournaments, in matches. And it's a rare child who doesn't move into a match and without a feeling of nervousness or anxiousness. And in many ways, that's no different from many of us adults. When we take on something that is, a little challenging, you do feel anxious, or you come into a situation that makes you nervous. I mean, your company is having a lot of layoffs, and that makes you nervous because you don't know whether you could be on the list. In such situations, the important thing is to move them away from that panic zone, tell them to detach and move them in their own way to identify an area of learning. They must find something new and challenging and interesting to them that will occupy their mind and not keep it fixed in the area of panic. That's the closest path towards mastery of flow. I hope that helps.
I'm sure it does. It helps me. So another question, Krishna. When moving from distraction during a coaching session, what is the best way to come back into present awareness?
So the question, as I understand it, Pepe, is that you realize you're distracted, and now you need to get back.
Exactly. I believe so. Yes. I read
The
it.
minute you
wrote.
Okay, thank you. The minute you realize that you're distracted, you're already more than 90% on the way to get back. The question is to realize you're distracted in the first place. That is awareness.
Exactly.
The minute I know that I am distracted, I would say, almost solved the problem. But most of us don't know we are distracted. That's the challenge, because we allow our thought processes to fly freely in all through our brain, and we are. There is a very famous philosophy. I mean, very famous phrase that I like to use called "take out the trash." As I speak to somebody and he speaks or she speaks to me, there is what I call, in a kind of metaphorical way, trash filling up, unnecessary information plugging my head. The minute I get rid of and I dispose of the trash, then my brain is uncluttered.
Another question is, and this I got it from WhatsApp. Please ask Krishna, how do you use the masteries in the aware model?
I get questions that will take another hour. No, in fact, I would say that, and I did that intentionally, Pepe, as you and I would realize, is that the IAC masteries, and this is something that would be, I think, important for us to share with all those listening in. The philosophy behind the IAC and the application of the masteries is that of self-learning. And I have, as a matter of intention, not given a formula to link the two. I would like our audience, our participants, the people who are kind enough to listen to me on this call to try and apply it on their own, because that's the only way that they will get onto the path of coaching masteries using the IAC 9 masteries, because those masteries, as we all are fond of saying, is a way of being. And I don't want it to be used as a model to apply.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a way of being. That's why we always say, live the masteries.
Yes.
And thanks, Krishna. I appreciate your time and method to share this presentation. I hope to see you again. Thank you very much. So we're getting to the end of this presentation. Krishna, I don't know if you have something else to say. Please share.
Oh, thank you so much, Pepe, and the team, Fernando and Martha and everybody else, both the Fernandos, all of you who are there as our team standing by me today for the presentation. Thank you, guys. You've been awesome. And a really big shout out to every one of you who has very patiently and given me a hearing and shared your questions, which were completely very deep. I wish I had more time to continue the conversation, and I hope that many of you will keep in touch. I look forward to that. I will try my best to interact with you. It has been a privilege. It's been an honor to be here today, and thanks again, everybody. Let's keep Vadis flying high. Thank you
Yeah, and
again.
in this first experience, we have a few people joining us from main China in Zoom, and the people that have listened to this live. We're going to be leaving the presentation here in our Facebook fan page, the IAC Facebook fan page, so everybody can come in and listen to the presentation in another time. And starting next year, all of these presentations are going to be available in our YouTube IAC channel. So Krishna, they were asking me also if you could share your email, but you have shared it already. So it's kk@intradconsult.com. And thank you very much, Krishna, and thank you all for staying tuned. This has been the first presentation, the first webinar in English in this Quo Vadis week. Tomorrow, at this same time, we will have Yecheskel Madanes, and his presentation will be Become a Masterful Coach with the IAC. But today, we still have another presentation, and this presentation will be in Spanish, and it will be also from Yecheskel that will be joining us from Tel Aviv, and he will give the same presentation that we will be able to listen tomorrow in English, Become a Masterful Coach with the IAC. That is the topic of his new book. So there's a new book and speaking about the masteries. And this presentation, we will have it at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 1 p.m. Central Time. And for our friends in Venezuela, that's going to be 2 p.m. Venezuela and 3 p.m. Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. And so, of course, 6 more hours after 2 p.m. for our friends in Spain. So we hope to see you there, and we hope that you can join us tomorrow when, as I was saying, Yecheskel Madanes will be speaking about how to become a masterful coach with the IAC. Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, Fernando Celis. Thank you, Fernando Gonzalez. Thank you, Martha Pasternak. Of course, Luis Gaviria and Lian Chan, the great team that has put together the IAC webinars for this year, the IAC Quo Vadis webinars. Thank you all, and we will be seeing you tomorrow. We invite your friends and help us. Don't forget, because they're telling me here, don't forget to give like to our Facebook page, and you can also click the button so you will be aware when our live events are starting. So thank you all. Thank you, Krishna. And thank you, everybody. And thank you all for joining this morning. Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning.